My name is Doug Sobey, and I'm the president of the Deck Area Historical Society. And this is the 7th of our 8 Monday evening talks this summer. And they've all been very successful, well attended, and also very interesting, a wide variety of topics. And tonight we're having a topic that we have a close connection with because of our acquisition of the L.M. Montgomery Lower Bedeck School, which is across the road and has been moved from Lower Bedeck in 2021 and has become a major part of our museum. And we have tried, and perhaps we will try to have one of our talks featuring Lucy L.M. Montgomery and her works and various aspects. And we did last year, and this year we're especially pleased to welcome Dr. Kate Scarth from the University of Prince Edward Island. Kate is the chair of the L.M. Montgomery Studies, L.M. Montgomery Studies with the L.M. Montgomery Institute at the university. And she is also an associate professor in applied communication, leadership, and culture. And she's doing various research projects, including she is the editor-in-chief of the Journal of L.M. Montgomery Studies. And she's writing a book with Trina Freever, featuring readers and fans' stories of how Montgomery has impacted their lives. And on Mod 150 Tributes, she's gathering tributes to celebrate the author's milestone birthday. And when I am so inept with media, when you have the hash, that means what? Twitter, is it? I don't know. Pardon?
X, no, X.
Oh, it's X. Yes, that is a bit.
I guess the idea is that you can collect themes, like if you
Oh,
click on
yes.
it, then you see who else is
Yeah.
posted, right? But I think then people just use them for fun, don't they?
Yes, I see. I have put, you requested mine, where I put a tribute. I don't know if that's the one where people wrote a short tribute or what the impact of L.M. Montgomery on their lives. And so I did so as well. And not to take up any time, but my knowledge of L.M. Montgomery goes back to grade 5 in Summerside Elementary School, where my teacher, Dolly Matthew, read to us Emily of New Moon. And so I still have vivid memories. It's amazing when, you know, the childhood stories you hear stay with you, and I can picture various scenes and from that novel. Well, you're going to be talking about Emily tonight, I think, in some aspects. Kate is designing a course on the life and works of Montgomery for the Great Courses Audible. Is that a website or?
Yeah, Audible is Amazon's audio streaming.
Oh, yes.
platform.
Yeah. So she's extremely busy in all aspects of L.M. Montgomery and also in her other university work. And tonight she is going to the title of her talk is Happy 150th Birthday, L.M. Montgomery. So Kate, very welcome tonight to speak about L.M. Montgomery to us. So thank you for coming.
Can you hear me like this? Can you? Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Doug, so much for the introduction and for the invitation, and to everyone at the museum. I'm so delighted to be here to celebrate Montgomery's 150th birthday. And her birthday's not till November 30th, so there's a lot of celebrating still to come. So she was, of course, born in 1874. Which makes it 150. So this is my overview for this evening's celebrations. I thought I would start by overviewing some of the ways that Montgomery's 150 is being celebrated, and I would love to hear about any that I've missed later on. Then I'm going to answer the question, why are we celebrating hashtag Mod 150? That's what the L.M. Montgomery Institute has been using for the Mod 150, and there are a lot of other clever, well, that one's not clever, but there are clever slogans being used this year. I'm going to look at how Montgomery celebrated her own birthday. I'm going to read you 3 passages from her journals, and then we'll have a look at how the characters celebrated birthdays in the novels, and also how some of the births are marked as well. All right, so how is Mod 150 being celebrated? Doug already told us about the Mod 150 tributes, which we've been sharing over the Journal of Ella Montgomery Studies and over the Institute's social media. Here's a list, I don't know if you can see that, but we've been organizing them according to themes. So there was a set of tributes around Emily and New Moon's birthday. And then, there's all these international national days of friendship, book lovers. So we've used those to organize tributes. And from lots of different people, academics, readers, people who have some connection with Montgomery. In the journal, we're also having 2 collections or special issues tied to Mod 150. This one is Writers and Artists Respond to Ella Montgomery. So we've got a reflection, a poem, and a painting that have been published so far. So we're going to have a whole range of artists and writers responding in different genres. We have a collection that's more focused on the anniversary too, that'll be coming out later this year. And that'll have some scholarly essays, but again, creative responses as well. We had our conference back in June, and we had a birthday cake. And if you're drooling a bit, there is a birthday cake just behind us too, so we will get to celebrate with cake after the talk. And I'm sure you're aware of the Montgomery 150 events that are happening on the island, and of course in the Lower Bedeck schoolhouse as well. And this event, A Day in Ella Montgomery's Classroom, goes until September 2nd, so there's still an opportunity to do that. And then some other events here on the island. If you haven't gone to see the book artists and book binders exhibit at the Confederation Court Mall in Charlottetown, I encourage you to do that. One of the things that I find really interesting about my job is I just never know who I'm going to end up talking to about their particular connection to Montgomery, and so this book artist exhibit was certainly one that was unexpected for me. A nod to Maud, this is happening in Leasdale, Ontario, and then For the Love of Maud in Norval. So Leasdale and Norval are the 2 sites where Ella Montgomery's husband was a Presbyterian minister, and so 2 sites in Ontario where she lived before retiring in Toronto. There's been some national attention, and I believe the Globe is going to be publishing an article even more focused on the birthday, closer to Montgomery's birthday on November 30th. You may be aware that the Royal Canadian Mint launched a coin featuring Montgomery and Anne, and that launch happened at Green Gables. And then other businesses with Montgomery link have of course been making hay with the event. Next Saturday, the new Thai translation of the whole Anne series is going to be presented to dignitaries on PEI. And here is the Thai translator, Veravati Monahan's MP, speaking about the translation in the House of Parliament. And it's something that's interesting about the Thai translation. Anne of Green Gables was translated about 30 years into Thai. It wasn't, there were pieces missing. That's often true in earlier translations. They're often pitched at a younger audience. So now the full book has been translated along with the other books in the series. And the books are beautiful as well. Knockabout Media out of Montreal is going to be launching a audio series about Montgomery. So lots of ways of celebrating online and just projects that are kind of happening, I think, because of the 150. And then this is a blog series that's happening as well. So those are some of the events that have been happening around Mod 150. But why celebrate Montgomery's 150th birthday? And I'm going to answer this question in part by drawing on some of the remarks that I gave at the Royal Canadian Mint event. So, Montgomery, of course, created the beloved Anne of Green Gables, and so much more. Montgomery told the stories of her home, of Prince Edward Island, of Canada, through novels, short stories, poetry, photography, scrapbooks, letters, and journals. And I think that that's something that I'd like people to take away from this year, is just the depth and breadth of her creation. Writer Alexander MacLeod calls Montgomery's journals one of the most important documents in the history of our country's literature. Ella Montgomery is a Canadian icon. She has shaped what it means to be Canadian. As former Governor General Adrienne Clarkson wrote, Ella Montgomery in all her books gave me a profound understanding of what Canada is. Through the particularity and peculiarities of Prince Edward Island and these girls' fictional lives, I became a Canadian. Montgomery has been called the Jane Austen of Canada. And if you'd like a more up-to-date comparison, a recent CBC program, Good Question PEI, hosted by Nicola McLeod, likened Montgomery's business and legal savvy to Taylor Swift's. The list of Canadian writers and artists who have been inspired by Montgomery is long, and I'm going to share a whole bunch of examples now, and I had to stop myself because I kept thinking about other people, but I think this will give us a really good taste. Margaret Atwood, of course. I love Margaret Atwood's reading of Anne of Green Gables as Marilla's story. So Marilla Cuthbert and her brother Matthew, of course, take in this orphan child. And Margaret Atwood argues that Marilla is the one who changes over the course of the novel in relation to this very kind of spunky, high-spirited, imaginative child. But in this quote, Margaret Atwood is putting Montgomery in a literary tradition, so showing us that Montgomery is a literary writer, on par with these other great writers, and drawing on traditions like the orphan story. Nobel laureate Alice Munro has talked a lot about how Emily of New Moon influenced her, and Doug has already talked about that novel being important for him, but Emily of New Moon is the most autobiographical of Montgomery's novels. It's a story of a young girl coming of age as a writer, living on the North Shore of PEI, and it's been a novel that's particularly important for aspiring Canadian writers. Harold Shields, a personal favorite of mine, talks about Montgomery's journals. Harold Shields is getting a good reception. And I like how she says, I know what the inside of another woman's head looks like. That there's something about Montgomery's journals that gives us particular insight into a female experience. Jane Urquhart wrote a short biography of Montgomery for the wonderful Extraordinary Canadian series. And here she's talking about something that I really appreciate about Montgomery too, just her immense ability and desire and need to record and curate her life and the people and places that she knew. And she does this in her novels, in her photography, in her journals. Heather O'Neill talks about how important Anne Shirley was to her as a young reader. And I love that she talks about how she was in love with Anne Shirley. And then she writes, I didn't like that other people were able to read Anne of Green Gables. I don't know if anyone else has ever had that feeling of like ownership, right? Like no one else can quite understand this character like I can. I just came across this quote, and I've been reading this biography of Mary Pratt, the painter. And as I'll show you in a minute, the St. John River Valley is really important in my life too. So I love this connection between New Brunswick and PEI. Montgomery, as I mentioned, was a photographer, and Elizabeth Epperly has talked about Montgomery's visual imagination and how important she saw in color and light, and the visual really important to how Montgomery saw the world. So I think this link with a painter is really important. Mariko Tamaki is one of the many people who have written kind of updated versions of Anne of Green Gables, like Anne of Manhattan is another one. I'm focusing on Canadian creators here. So Mariko Tamaki wrote Anne of Greenville, and so Anne in this book is Japanese American, she's queer, but she shares many characteristics with Anne, like imagination. I thought it was interesting too in this quote, Tamaki emphasizes that she came to the series through the Megan Follows Kevin Sullivan adaptation, which I know is so important for, well, myself included, and other people who kind of grew up in the 80s and 90s. So lots of ways of coming at Montgomery. Uzma Jalaluddin also kind of updates classic books. Aisha at Last is Pride and Prejudice, but in Muslim community in Toronto in the early 21st century. And for her, the third Anne book was how she came to the series and to Montgomery. And she talks about how Gilbert Blythe was particularly important for her, as for a lot of people. I think Jonathan Crombie in particular, his representation of Gilbert really resonated with people. Here we have Louise Penny, of course, the mystery writer, who is in her newsletter to her fans using Anne as kind of COVID-era inspiration or encouragement. Carly Fortune, many of you have probably seen this book around. I'd say she wrote the book of summer 2024. I saw a gal carrying it onto Brackley Beach this summer, and so this is her first book set in PEI, and each section opens with a quote from an Anne book. And Carly was also at the Mint launch, and is clearly, like in this Instagram post, doing a lot to kind of remind people of Montgomery's powerful writing. Marilyn Lightstone played Miss Stacy in the Anne series, and she wrote one of the Mod 150 tributes for us, and she's talking about the power of seeing herself dubbed into Persian and Polish, right? So just kind of giving us, again, a sense of the impact, the global impact of Montgomery. Gracie Finley, who of course played Anne on the Confederation stage for many years, also shared with us a Maud tribute and what it was like to play Anne. Rachel McAdams, Hollywood actress who narrates the really excellent audible Anne of Green Gables, so this is a straight up narrative, and she just talks about that experience there. Catherine O'Hara, who you might know from Second City or from Schitt's Creek or Home Alone, is Marilla in the new Audible. This is a dramatic adaptation of Anne of Green Gables, but audio only. And again, this is her talking about that experience of getting inside Marilla's head. And this is directed by Megan Follows, who of course played Anne, so her Montgomery journey continues. Another Maud tribute, I wanted to put Anime Krudas in here because she is the ballerina who is Anne in the ballet. And one thing I love about Hannah May's quote here is she talked about how different characters resonated with different members of her family. So Emily for my mother, the story girl for my sisters, Anne for me. I had a student this term who, it wasn't a Montgomery course, but she just decided her course project was going to be to pick different majors at UPEI and tell students who are majoring in history or sociology or whatever it is what the Anne book for them is. So that's kind of in the spirit, or the Montgomery book for them. And I think this is my last example before we move on to something else, but I couldn't not talk about Anne with an E. I didn't realize that Maura Wally Beckett, who was the showrunner for Breaking Bad, and then Anne with an E, did grow up in Vancouver. And here she's talking about the darker aspects of the show, which she's saying she did pull out of the novel, that they were there in the book. She's just kind of emphasized them, and I know that this is a controversial part of this series. Anne with an E is such an interesting one because it was so controversial and so beloved by so many that when it was canceled, there was a petition that got about 1 million signatures demanding that Netflix put it back on. And it's been particularly popular in South America. We had a student, Tatiana Rodriguez Lopez dos Santos, who was here from Brazil in August 2023, who first encountered Montgomery through Anne with an E, then went to the books, read them, loved them, and is now doing a PhD on Montgomery in Brazil. So it's fascinating meeting these people, and I think Anne with an E brings more people to Montgomery, but I find it really interesting that someone could love the series and then the books because they are so different, but it's clearly happening. All right, so those have been Canadian examples. We've got a sense of how Canadian artists, writers have been impacted by Montgomery. But Montgomery is also a cultural ambassador, bringing Canada to people around the world. So Mark Twain, who was alive when Anne came out, wrote that Anne was the dearest, most moving and delightful child since the immortal Alice of Wonderland. And then another American who appreciated Montgomery was Aretha Franklin. I feel like the quote should say, I love Anne of Green Gables, I have for years. I think that. So she talked about how much she loved these characters in Anne of Green Gables and how much she would have liked to come to PEI. And of course, lots of fans do make that pilgrimage here because of Montgomery. And at the University of Prince Edward Island's recent Ella Montgomery Institute conference, presenters were from 16 different countries, including Australia, Austria, Brazil, Chile, India, Iran, Sweden, Poland, Japan, China, and South Africa. I think that celebrating Montgomery's 150 also puts her up on the level of other great writers. So there are lots of plans in place for Jane Austen's 250th next year, and so I'm seeing Montgomery kind of on on that international level. So those are some of the ways that Montgomery's impacted Canadians. She's had a global impact. Her impact has been cultural and artistic. But of course, there's like also the personal part of it. And I think that most Montgomery readers and fans, and this is something the project I'm doing with Trina Freever, we've been collecting these origin stories of how people have come to Montgomery and what Montgomery means to them. So that's me when I'm 8 at my first visit to Green Gables with my family. And I've told this story a lot. I came with my stack of Anne books. I'd already watched the Sullivan production. I toured my family around the Haunted Wood. That was the part I was most excited about. Yeah, whether they wanted that tour or not, they certainly got it. And then here's my daughter at Green Gables this spring playing with the Legos. But I think one thing I've realized in more recent years is how this place is really in some ways my Green Gables or my Montgomery place. Oh. There we go. So this house is our camp on the St. John River. I mentioned the St. John River, New Brunswick is an important place for me. It has a name which feels like a very Montgomery thing, like Green Gables, New Moon. It's called Caton's View, which is a name my grandmother gave it because it looks out over Caton's Island in the St. John River. And Montgomery really gave me this filter to see the world, to see the beauty, the magic of the world. I think to really appreciate place, family, friendship, memory, stories, childhood. And this is my niece Abby, who just kind of took my hat and ran up the hill and I got a snapshot, not realizing that it was kind of going to be the perfect Abigail of Caton's View shot. And just that the colors of the house match Green Gables is just a coincidence that works. All right, so we're gonna switch to Montgomery's words because I've been talking about other people's reactions to Montgomery and how that shows reasons. Those are reasons why we still celebrate her and her writing. But I think it's important to look at her writing because ultimately that's why we're still talking about her. So I'm gonna start with the journals and I'm gonna focus in on her talking about 3 of her birthdays. A couple things before I read the passages. I think like so much of Montgomery's writing, these are really rich passages. So in them, we get a lot of different emotions, tones, literary techniques, and activities. She was a very busy person. So you get a measure of the woman and the writer in these passages. We also get a sense of how birthdays can mean a lot, and we know this from our own experience, that it can mean change. It's a time to reflect, a time of growth, of development. It can be a time of joy and of sorrow, of celebration, of coming together, of gifts, of gift giving. But I'm going to stop talking now and let Montgomery speak. So this is, the passage I'm going to read is from 1914. Okay. My 40th birthday, once I thought 40 must be the end of everything, but it isn't. I don't feel any older today than yesterday when I was only 39, or the day before yesterday when I was 19. Thank God we don't feel old. Life is much richer, fuller, happier, more comfortable for me now than it was when I was 20. I have won the success I resolved to win 20 years ago. It is worth the struggle, but I would not wish to be 20 again with the struggle still before me. No, I am quite content to be 40, though it does sound so impossible. And I suppose the next 20 years will fly even more swiftly. Then I shall, if living, be 60. That sounds grandmotherly. Tonight brought me a bitter pang, though not on account of the vanished years. On our way home from Uxbridge, Ewan and I stopped at Zion to see the tiny tablet we have had put down to mark the spot where little Hugh sleeps. Oh, as I stood by that wee grave in the dim, dull November twilight, with the cheerless autumn landscape all around, my heart ached agonizingly. Why, oh why must it be? My bonny blue-eyed darling, he would just have been beginning to be so bright and interesting. So Hugh is her second son, who was stillborn, and I think it's really powerful that on the day of her birthday, she's marking also his birth and his death. And this is something that we'll see again, but often Montgomery makes that link between birth and death. And I think it, on one level, there just were high rates of child mortality, or higher rates than now. But also it just shows that all of the joy and the beauty in Montgomery, I think, is so powerful, because she's always aware of the darkness in life as well. But of course the passage opens with humor, which is just, classic Montgomery, that, yesterday I was 39 and the day before that I was 19, right? Like it just, like the time just goes by. Like as she said, it seems impossible. I love too that she's reflecting on her career, right? That it hasn't been easy, but she recognizes the success, and she wouldn't be 20 again. So there's an appreciation of being 40 as well. All right, let's skip ahead 5 years. I'm 45 years old today, not a particularly exhilarating fact. I don't look 45. Strangers usually guess my age is 30. My hair is still dark in general effect. My complexion is reasonably fresh, and I have no wrinkles, owing, I suppose, to faithful cold creaming and massage every night, as well as to a series of facial muscle exercises I invented myself and practice regularly every day. And I don't feel 45, at least I don't feel as I once supposed a woman of 45 must inevitably feel, but I am 45, and life must be on the downgrade henceforth. Well, I may as well look the fact in the face, distasteful as it is, and make the rest of it. After all, most of the time I shall forget that I am 45, or any age, and then it will not matter. And that's kind of a profound point, right? Birthdays make us think about our age, but then, most of the time you're not thinking about it. I do love to, like, Montgomery, created these great works of art. Her characters are these really ambitious intellectual girls, but, vanity is always there too. You can see where Anne loving those puff sleeves comes from, right? Her creator shared that desire to look good. Okay, so one last passage from Montgomery on her birthday. Today was my birthday. I got more presents than I've had since I was 10 years old. Stuart, and that's her 10-year-old son, gave me a centerpiece he had embroidered himself. Elsie gave me an apron, Ewan a box of chocolates, and Mrs. Mills a cushion, an awful cushion of log cabin silks in purple and green. The purple is purple and the green is green, with a full wide frill of glowing scarlet. The thing would put your eyes out. And yet the gratitude behind it made it of value, and I was absolutely sincere in my expression of appreciation. But I shall stow it away in the same box with the autograph quilt Zephyr WMS gave me, and the other autograph quilt the mission band gave me. There are certain things one cannot have before their eyes all the time. I've endured considerable these past years. I may and fear I am fated to endure a good deal more, but I will not endure that green and purple and scarlet nightmare. So Montgomery, yes, had definitely been through hard times. There was a legal battle with her publisher. There were legal issues around a car accident her husband was in. Both she and her husband's mental health challenges had emerged. So things had been difficult. We saw that she lost a baby, but she's still able to laugh at herself, and that's something we see again and again in her journals, and then again in her novels as well. So those are some examples of how Montgomery celebrated her birthday. And I'm going to turn now to the fiction. So there are lots of birthdays mentioned in Montgomery's novels. Some of you may remember, and this is in the Sullivan production too, when Anne and Diana kind of get that running start. They run into and jump into what they think is a empty spare room. They land on Aunt Josephine. She's the wealthy aunt from Charlottetown. She's going to pay for Diana's music lesson. But after this incident, she's going to cut Diana off. And of course, Anne waltzes in, turns Aunt Josephine, and all is well. And in fact, Anne and Josephine have this long friendship. And that actually happens on Diana's birthday. So Anne convinces Marilla to let her go to a concert and then sleep over at Diana's against Marilla's better judgment. But it all works out in the end. In Anne of Avonlea, when Anne is a school teacher working in Avonlea, she decides that she doesn't like the fact that her birthday is in March, because of course in PEI March it's still winter. So she just moves her birthday to the spring, and she and her friends go off into the spring and have this golden picnic. And I know, even Betsy Epperly, if any of you know her, right, like is, maybe the ultimate Montgomery scholar and fan, but she finds that even this is a bit too over the top. So it's, it's a very idyllic afternoon. I was just rereading the passage, and Anne brings lemonade and sandwiches. You can see the picnic baskets here in this fan art, but she decides that it's more poetical to drink water right out of the brook. So she makes this a cup out of birch bark that leaks, and the water tastes like mud because it's a spring. But yeah, it's more poetic than having the lemonade. Yeah, and you can see both this and the picture in the car are both fan art, which is definitely a presence online. So yeah, so that's the Golden Picnic. The scene right here from an anime in front of the lighthouse of Emily of New Moon and her friends, I included that because there are a lot of schoolyard politics that revolve around birthdays in Montgomery's novels, especially in the Emily books. So who's going to be invited and who's not. So when Emily first moves to New Moon, she befriends this gal, Rhoda Stewart. They're besties. Everyone's trying to curry favor with Emily to get invited to Rhoda's birthday because they're going to get invitations in the mail, and there's going to be a cake with pink icing, and it's all very exciting. And then a little rich girl comes with the latest fashions from Charlottetown, and Rhoda forgets about Emily, who doesn't get invited. So lots of kind of learning how to be with each other. Friendships made and broken around birthday parties. And we'll see a happier version of a birthday party in Emily in a few minutes. When Anne is a teacher again in Avonlea, some of the boys have firecrackers and pinwheels that are supposed to be for a birthday party that night, and they set them off in Anne's classroom. So lots of fun, testing of authority. It's kind of a carnival-esque, kind of breaking with the everyday around birthdays. At one point, Emily takes a like a red velvet flower from her aunt's hat, dips it in water and puts it on her cheeks, blush, to go to a birthday party, and she sets off thinking she looks pretty swell. I'm imagining kind of like a clown makeup effect. And when she gets back, her stern Aunt Elizabeth, so just picture Marilla Cuthbert, but sterner, is not amused and tells her she looks cheap, which Emily has kind of realized at that point. So it's kind of, Emily kind of negotiating the parameters of what's acceptable behavior and self-presentation in her community. All right, has anyone read The Blue Castle? It's a fan favorite. It seems that many people I speak with, it's their favorite Montgomery book. It's one that she purposely wrote for adults because she was starting to get a reputation in the 1920s as just a writer for children, which she hadn't seen herself as. So Valency's story in The Blue Castle starts on her 29th birthday. She is a spinster who lives under the thumb of her very oppressive mother and a very oppressive family. They treat her like she's a child still, not like she's 29. She always has to go to her relatives, her aunts and uncles' anniversary picnic. So even her birthday is not about her. But eventually, because of a medical mix-up, and I'll avoid spoilers, she ends up running away, and you can see her in the car leaving. The sign says, "Welcome to Deerwood," and it's firmly in the rearview mirror, right? And so they're leaving that oppressive town behind. So Valency's 29th birthday is the last one she's going to experience before her freedom. I also included an actual propaganda poster from World War I, because in Real Life Ingleside, which is Montgomery's World War I novel, Carl Meredith signs up to go fight in France on his 18th birthday, as many men at that time would have done, or of course, we know that some went even earlier, but yeah, 18 was when you could legally sign up. So lots of different kinds of birthdays happening in Montgomery's fiction. I'm going to look at one in a little more detail from Emily of New Moon, just to give you a sense of the character dynamics and the gifts that were shared at kind of a happy birthday. So Emily of New Moon, just briefly, I know I've talked about this novel already. Emily is an orphan. Well, her father dies soon after the beginning of the novel, and she goes to live with her Murray relatives who take her in out of sense of duty rather than love. It's the first in a 3-part series. There are 3 novels in the series, and again, it's Montgomery's most autobiographical novels about a young writer coming of age. All right. So bear with me. I'm going to read this quote, but I'll comment on it as I go along. So, as I said, Emily's father has passed away, but she writes him letters. Yesterday was my birthday, dear father. It will soon be a year since I came to New Noon. I feel as if I had always lived here. And I love that her birthday is kind of accompanied by this other milestone of her becoming Emily of New Noon. My birthday was very nice. Aunt Laura made a lovely cake, so we have, birthday cake, just as we might expect at a birthday today, and gave me a beautiful new white petticoat with an embroidered flounce. She had run a blue ribbon through it, but Aunt Elizabeth made her pull it out. So we get a sense of Aunt Elizabeth, right? Like no excessive fripperies or no ostentation here. Again, very similar to Marilla Cuthbert not wanting Anne to wear puff sleeves. And Aunt Laura also gave me that piece of pink satin brocade in her bureau drawer. I've longed for it ever since I saw it, but never hoped to possess it. Ilse asked me what I meant to do with it, but I don't mean to do anything with it. Only keep it up here in the garret with my treasures and look at it because it is beautiful. So that's really saying something about Emily, right? Like things can be beautiful, they don't have to have a use. Aunt Elizabeth gave me a dictionary. That was a useful present. So immediately the contrast with what's beautiful. I feel I ought to like it. You will soon notice an improvement in my spelling, I hope. So although Emily's kind of grudging about this present, we can see by reading this that, yeah, actually it probably will be useful for her, right? Lots of spelling mistakes. The only trouble is when I'm writing something interesting, I get so excited. It is just awful to have to stop and hunt up a word to see how it is spelled. Cousin Jimmy gave me a big, thick, blank book. I'm so proud of it. It will be so nice to write pieces in. But I will still use the letter bills to write to you, dear father, because I can fold each one up by itself and address it like a real letter. So wanting to keep that relationship with her father going, and her letters to her father, kind of chronicling her own life, are going to be kept separate from her creative writing, which happened in what becomes the Jimmy books. And so, if we think of birthdays as milestones, this is a really important one in Emily's development as a writer, because she has a play. Aunt Elizabeth won't give her paper to write, and eventually she has to promise Aunt Elizabeth she won't write creatively, but Cousin Jimmy is supporting this. And so I think that, yeah, a milestone into a writer happening on her birthday is a nice conjunction. So Teddy gave me a picture of myself. So Teddy's her friend, eventual love interest. He painted it in watercolors and called it the smiling girl. I look as if I was listening to something that made me very happy. Ilse says it flatters me. It does make me better looking than I am, but not any better looking than I would be if I could have a bang. And this is a book just kind of overflowing with creativity. Emily's going to become a writer. Teddy's going to become a professional artist. And Montgomery has big dreams for these kids growing up on the North Shore, the PEI dreams that they achieve. Even Perry, who's from Stovetide Town, so he's the hired boy, ends up becoming the prime minister. So she lets them be ambitious for sure. And and not having a bang, that's Aunt Elizabeth again. So a dig in at Aunt Elizabeth not letting her have a bang. So Perry walked all the way to Shrewsbury to get me a necklace of pearl beads and lost it. He had no more money, so he went home to Stovepipe Town and got a young hen from his Aunt Tom and gave me that. He's a very persistent boy. I'd have all the eggs the hen lays to sell the peddler for myself. Ilse gave me a box of candy. I'm only going to eat one piece a day to make it last a long time. I wanted Ilse to eat some, but she said she wouldn't because it would be mean to help eat a present you had given, and I insisted, and then we fought over it. And Ilse said I was a caterwauling quadruped, which was ridiculous, and didn't know enough to come in when it rained. And I said I knew enough to have some manners at least. Ilse got so mad she went home, but she cooled off soon and came back for supper. And so I think in this, you get a real sense of Montgomery's skill as a writer, Emily's skill as a writer, that there are these little short stories, right, that we get very quickly. And again, we see Montgomery's sense of humor. And Ilse and Emily's relationship. Emily doesn't really get it initially, but then she realizes, oh, this is just how Ilse does friendship. So you get a real sense of what their friendship is like more broadly there, too. So birthdays, of course, mark birth. So I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about births in Montgomery's fiction. And I'm going to turn to Pat Silverbush. Here's a picture of me reading, I think, my brand new Pat Silverbush that I got for Christmas. Pat's one of the lesser known series. There are 2 books in this series. You know, if we think that Anne loves Green Gables, Pat really loves Silverbush, and she's really resistant to change. And you get that sense in this passage. So Pat's mom, Pat doesn't realize that she's about 7 or 8, that her mom is about to have a baby. So Judy Plum, the really beloved housekeeper, is trying to feel Pat out to see how she's going to deal with this change, and says that she's going to have to go soon dig around in the parsley bed, and maybe she'll find a baby there. And Pat's not too sure about this, but when she meets the baby, how could Silverbush have never, you know, had lived without this baby? One thing that I learned just in Googling, batches go out.
I'll change the batteries in case it is that last week. First of all, we just try to
Is it working now? It is,
Yeah.
yeah.
Is it working? Yeah. Pardon? Yeah, it's no, I think we can just I'll take that and look at it where we can right here. In the meantime, perhaps you could just project. Yeah. If this,
My next point was just kind of a fun aside that I found when I was looking at babies being found in parsley beds, because of course it made me think of my Cabbage Patch doll. But then I found, according to this dictionary of slang, that baby girls are found in parsley beds, but little boys are found in a less appealing nettle bed or beneath the gooseberry bush. And it is a baby girl, Rachel, that who Judy does end up finding. So that's clearly a child's eye view of so that's a child's eye view of birth, and I'd like to turn to Anne's House of Dreams, where we get a more adult version of birth. So in Anne's House of Dreams, this is the book where Anne and Gilbert are first married, and Anne has 2 babies in the House of Dreams. Right at the beginning of this book, just as Anne and Gilbert are about to get married, Marilla makes this link between a birth, a wedding, and a death for being important in terms of consecrating a home. And she's talking about Green Gables there. But I think this is an important point that travels through the book. So this is the description, part of the description of the first birth, and I'm gonna read it. I mean, there are 2 more passages that I'm gonna read in detail. The June night was short, but it seemed an eternity to those who waited and watched. Oh, will it never end, said Marilla. Then she saw how grave the nurse and Dr. Dave looked, and she dared ask no more questions. Suppose Anne, but Marilla could not suppose it. Do not tell me, said Susan, fiercely, answering the anguish in Marilla's eyes, that God could be so cruel as to take that darling lamb from us when we all love her so much. He has taken others as well, beloved, said Marilla hoarsely. But at dawn, when the rising sun rent apart the mists hanging over the sandbar and made rainbows of them, joy came to the little house. Anne was safe, and a wee white lady with her mother's big eyes was lying beside her. Gilbert, his face gray and haggard from his night's agony, came down to tell Marilla and Susan. Thank God, shuddered Marilla. For those of you who've read this book, you know that this joy is short-lived. The baby doesn't, only lives for a day. And in Anne's reaction to this, we feel Montgomery's own anguish at losing her baby. This is a description just after the second baby's born, and of course Anne's first question is, will this baby live? And right away, Gilbert says yes, and he makes a joke that the doctor said the hair will be red. Anne is furious with her, and I'm tickled to death. So we have this, throwback to their, the early days of their relationship. That was a wonderful day in the little house of dreams. And Anne, of course, is thinking about the horrible day last summer. And Marilla says that this baby will take Joy's place. And Anne's reaction is, and that's the name of the first baby, Joy. Oh, no, Marilla, he can't. Nothing can ever do that. He has his own place, my dear wee man-child. But little Joy has hers and always will have it. If she had lived, she would have been over a year old. She would have been toddling around on her tiny feet and lisping a few words. I can see her so plainly, Marilla. Oh, I know now that Captain Jim was right when he said God would manage better than that my baby would seem a stranger to me when I found her beyond. I've learned that this past year. I followed her development day by day and week by week. I always shall. I shall know just how she grows from year to year, and when I meet her again, I'll know her. She won't be a stranger. Oh, Marilla, look at his dear darling toes. Isn't it strange they should be so perfect? I think that's really powerful how Anne is marking the first baby's development, and the birthdays are implied, right? She'd be just over a year. I'm gonna know what she looks like, what she's doing year after year. And again, we get how Montgomery's able to cram so much life into a short passage, right? There's Gilbert's joke, their inside joke, but the reader is inside too, on Anne's red hair. And then right at the end, Anne's able to really feel that connection with the first baby and then take the pleasure in the second baby, Jim, as well. So humor, grief, acceptance, joy, it's all there. And then finally, when Anne and Gilbert realized they had to leave the House of Dreams, it's too out of the way for Gilbert's medical practice. They're going to have a bunch more kids. It's just not big enough. Montgomery makes that point explicit. Joy and grief, birth and death have made sacred forever this little House of Dreams. And this idea of consecration that Marilla invoked at the beginning is brought back, so that through these difficulties, there's this irreparable spiritual, emotional bond with a place. And Montgomery doesn't lose that thread in Rainbow Valley. The next book in the series is kind of invoked in a humorous way. So Jim, the second baby, is the only living child born in the House of Dreams, so he kind of has this special status. The rest of the children are born at Ingleside, their next home, but it means that Jim's always seen as a baby. I'm not little anymore, Mother, he cried indignantly on his 8th birthday. I'm awful big. Mother had sighed and laughed and sighed again, and she never called him Little Jim again, in his hearing at last. So that memory of the House of Dreams is always there, and that the birth of Jim and of Joy, it keeps that connection for Anne. All right, one last example. Anne gets to go back to her own birthplace. Of course, Anne is an orphan who comes to live at Green Gables, but she was born in Bolingbroke, Nova Scotia, which people, scholars speculate is Windsor, Nova Scotia. And so when Anne is studying in a fictional Halifax, she goes there, and the woman who owns the house now gives her a tour. She gives her letters that her mother had written, and including her mother had written, I love her best when she is asleep and better still when she is awake, talking about her baby. But one thing that I think is interesting here is that Anne says that those letters have made her parents real to her. And so she has this stronger connection. And I was just thinking, it's interesting how in some ways Anne going back to her birthplace reflects readers and fans' own journey to writers, homes, and birthplaces. And that there's something about finding the author, the character, visiting that place makes them real to us. And Montgomery had this experience herself. She loved to be a literary tourist. So she went to Concord, Massachusetts, and she visited, for example, Louisa May Alcott, who wrote Little Women's House. And she said it gave a strange reality to the books of theirs, and she's talking about Nathaniel Hawthorne and Emerson as well, which I read to see those places where they once lived and labored. And there's something interesting about that strange reality. You can't quite put your words on it, but there's something special about visiting those places. And of course, we can visit Montgomery's birthplace, as well as many other sites tied to her life. I was reading somewhere about how this visiting the birthplace, you can visit Shakespeare's birthplace or Montgomery's birthplace, other writers, that when people are born, it's something that's kind of disappearing because people are born in hospitals now. And maybe there are some hospitals where there are plaques that say so-and-so was born here, but it's not quite the same intimate experience, right, as going to someone's home. I think that even Shakespeare, you can see the bed that he was born in, so there's maybe something intimate that's lost there. All right. Well, in conclusion, Ellen Montgomery once wrote, "I love the little island province where I was born. I love its life and its people, and so I write about them because I want my readers to know and love them too." Well, mission accomplished, right? Travelers come from all around the world to visit Montgomery's Island, and many have come specifically to celebrate in 2024. So I want to thank all of you for being here today to celebrate the anniversary of the 150th birthday of this extraordinary Canadian artist, genius, and icon. Thank you.